Welcome to the Life Science Success Podcast. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don Davis. I'm a consultant in life sciences, and I help companies manage complexity and increase performance. Before we hop into today's interview, I just wanted to bring up really quickly, on my website, you'll find an organizational maturity assessment. That assessment actually helps organizations that are looking to scale. So if your organization is one of those that has found funding, you're looking to increase the amount of people and want to just make sure that as your company grows, that you overall know whether or not if you're going to be able to scale or if you're going to run into challenges doing that. The organizational maturity assessment is a great way to find out well in advance of adding people. So with that, today my guest is Nathan Clark. Nathan is the co-founder of Ganymede and is passionate about biotechnology. So with that, welcome, Nathan.
Thanks, Don. Great to be on here. I'm looking forward to the chat.
Yes, it'd be great. So before we hop into it, could you tell listeners just a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Nathan. I'm one of the co-founders of Ganymede. I primarily focus on our engineering, product, and commercial sides of the business. My co-founder Benson is more on the implementation side, and we're a fairly new startup. We've been growing very quickly. I can dive a little bit more deeply into what we do, but ultimately it's integrating everything, integrating instruments, integrating apps, integrating data systems in the life sciences and manufacturing, really anywhere where there's complex physical processes with an analytical component. And prior to that, both myself and my co-founder, we have a background in data and machine learning systems. I was most recently at Benchling. My co-founder was at a fintech company called Affirm, which is where I was before that, where I met him. And then we both have a background in finance. So a little bit of a transition in that, but I'm loving every second of the life sciences industry.
Yeah. So what made you interested in life sciences?
Yeah, we've always been, I think, both myself and Benson, pretty interested in the life sciences. Although I actually love finance academically, it's a really cool field. It's hard to beat the impact and tangibility that you can have in the life sciences directly on people's health. And I do think also I have a somewhat unusual view on that, which is that if you do finance responsibly and if you are offering, ethical, transparent, for instance, what we did with the buy now, pay later fintech company we were at, Affirm, small point of sale checkout loans, that can be quite helpful for the world. But when it comes to biotech, there's so much potential and so much impact and leverage that you can have. And although people complain, drug prices are very, very expensive, it takes billions of dollars to develop drugs, that's very much at the end state of the drug development process, and very much the consumer-facing side, where there certainly are a lot of problems. But when you look at the day-to-day lives of scientists, what they're doing on the lab bench, or technicians on a factory floor in manufacturing, they are not nearly as well paid as folks like Silicon Valley software developers. The work that they do is so much more manual and less automated and under-leveraged. And so in that sense, that's where I think for myself and my co-founder, we feel like there's so much potential to help them and to accelerate their work and make their lives better. And that'll pay huge dividends throughout the chain of drug development and of really any manufacturing complex process that people are trying to develop.
And where does the name Ganymede come from?
That's a great question. So I love space things, and all the companies that I've been at are littered with different space themed project code names and things. And so whenever I come up with something new, it's always space themed. And when I was thinking about a project code name for this in the early days, I just came up with Ganymede. The criteria was basically, it has to be a space thing. So Ganymede, for those who don't know, is one of the moons of Jupiter. It's one of the Galilean moons, one of the first, I think the first set of moons that were discovered in the solar system outside of Earth's own moon by Galileo. And so it's a very cool space thing. And if you go to the .com of it, there's nothing there, so that we can eventually buy it. That was the criteria.
Yeah.
And here we are. And it took off, and now that's the name.
It's interesting to me because I mean, in the '70s, right, the Voyager passed by it. It was the first sort of real indications of the shape of the planet and things like that. And one of the things that oftentimes is discussed as well is it's very magnetic. And so I didn't know if it was
Mm.
the fact that it surface is covered in ice and salt water and or if it had anything more to do with it. But there are always deeper meanings I find to company names as well, and so always interesting to just understand a little bit more.
I might steal that magnetic thing now.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, feel free. I mean, it's all a part of the overall history, but I mean it's just interesting to me to watch what we can do with space exploration, and just knowing that life science ties back to an awful lot of the things that have been studied outside of our gravity as well, is always interesting to me, as well. So I mean, what led you overall to co-founding the company?
Yeah, so for this is true for myself. I always say myself and my co-founder, but I think it is true for both of us. We've had a pretty good career in finance. We, I think, learned a ton there, but have wanted to go and give back, as I mentioned, and we see this as such a high leverage area. So I decided to move my career into biotech and to learn the space and find the right way to contribute. And I think what I realized fairly quickly is that there's so much there's so much data in this space. And biology is an interesting field also because there's not actually that many layers of theory to what people are doing. I think it stands to continue the space contrast analogy. Physics has many, many layers of theory. You have to go incrementally work through the math and work up to the theory because it's a very mathematical thing. Whereas biology is much more of an empirical science. It's much more understanding the particular way that these proteins and these DNA sequences and these cells are interacting in a certain way, and you can construct a lot on top of that. But breaking that into data, the data and the manipulations and statistics and analysis that you do on it is actually quite simple. And what inhibits this field, based on what I've seen, is the fact that the data is so complex and the process is what matters. Especially taking something like, say, cell and gene therapies, like a hybridoma workflow for monoclonal antibody production. How you describe that workflow in data is so hard to pin down, and how you describe your QC step of your particular bioprocess or something is so hard to pin down. It's true to an extent even for small molecule drug discovery too, describing the process of drug development and testing, and you can standardize how your PK assays work, but how does the distribution to clinical sites work? That's a super complex thing. So that's, in my mind, the inhibiting challenge here. And that complexity really holds things back. And so I think what inspired Ganymede in the early days was seeing that the data complexity, whenever you want to integrate something, if you want to integrate an app, if you want to integrate a lab instrument, if you want to integrate a database, it's never hard to actually touch the system to make that connection mechanically. What's hard then is what you do with that data and how you map it together and how you bind everything into a single data structure to actually connect things at the business logic level. And so I think once we started digging into that and asking around and getting perspectives on that, it became clear that this was a huge unmet need. So we decided to launch Ganymede based on that, since this is something that I think we're well suited to do actually, especially given from myself and my co-founder, we have a pretty big background in machine learning. I like to say that bio is actually a very difficult space for machine learning. There's a lot that needs to be done before you can get to the world of something like fintech, where machine learning is a very, you have to have it in some way to be competitive these days when you're doing something like lending. The data is so messy and it needs to have this preemptive step of being made sense of. That to us is what we are trying to solve, is helping people make sense of the data. And so, it's a very interesting application, I think, of what we've learned from machine learning generally, to invert that and say, what if it's really hard here? How would you fix that?
Yeah. So just to understand and dive down a little bit deeper, so I've worked on projects before to try and take instruments that are, let's say, in the discovery lab, sort of track them and understand when are they running, when are they not, when overall, can people access them, because, again, idle time, is wasted time in the lab. And so, oftentimes if you have samples to run or you have, studies to complete, understanding where there's capacity is really key. Sounds to me though that you're more focused on what's coming out of the machine. How do you leverage that instrument information in addition to the statistics that might come out of it as well? Is that an accurate sort of interpretation, or?
That's exactly right. So, for instance, one of our earliest and deepest partners is this company called Apprentice. They're a manufacturing execution system. And for them, we help integrate data from these instruments directly into their app. So maybe running it through some analysis or transformation along the way. But especially if you're trying to handle things like improving instrument utilization, it's always better to say, okay, you got to disassociate the data from the physical instrument. Once the instrument runs, that data needs to be in a fair format in the cloud automatically. And not even, when I say fair format, that's not like a fair file format like a CSV. It needs to be a database. It needs to be a structured database with some meaning that you can apply to it so that you can say, okay, my data from my flow cytometer, my data from my bioreactor, my data from my mass spec, all of it's just database tables in one place. So you can combine it together, run an analysis, and then put it where it needs to go. And that's exactly what we try to facilitate. So when, for instance, a bioreactor is something where it runs, but then you want to turn it over and get it running again once the batch completes as quickly as possible. If you could automatically have all that data as it's coming off flow, not just through an analysis, because there's analytical tools out there, but also directly into your MES or directly into your batch record or your ELN or LIMS system, that automation of the data movement too, and being able to see where the data came from, speeds things up substantially. Or if you talk about something like an LC that constantly has bottlenecks of people using it and maybe monopolizing the instrument because they're using some app from the manufacturer on the PC attached to it. So they're just using the computer, but they're blocking physically someone else using the instrument and running it. That also helps so much. You got to get them out of there. No one can do analysis. No one should be moving data manually, and no one should be analyzing data physically in the wet lab. The only thing to do there is to run the instrument and handle the physical samples. And that's exactly the vision that we're trying to push towards.
Great. And then who do you serve? What sort of customers would pick up the phone and call you?
Yeah, it's pretty broad actually. So we certainly do a lot within biotech. I would say our bread and butter today is mostly mid-sized biotech companies, pharma companies, but we do a lot in larger enterprise. For life sciences that skews quickly into manufacturing. And that in turn skews into stuff outside of the life sciences world. So we also will work with chemical, industrial kind of companies. Even CPG, for instance, can benefit from this because that's where your production line is probably pretty automated and standardized, but then you have a QC lab. And so there's still this analytical component that affects your decision making that it would be nice to have automated more. And so we thrive across that spectrum. But I would say anyone where, we're not a replacement for a LIMS system or anything like that. We're not necessarily a replacement for people doing manual analysis or something like Excel. We're there to unite all the different systems into one place. So usually I would say people, once they reach a certain threshold, they start having trouble with their data where they say, hey, I've got all these files, I've got all these apps, I've got all these analytical tools, and everyone's just moving data manually and I can't make sense of it, and I'm losing data and I'm losing files or I'm losing context. And so that's, I would say, when we come in really well and couple ourselves with their digital transformation strategy where they'll say, it would be nice to have all my data traceable and tracked and in some fair format. And we power that and then also can help them change their business processes sometimes to some extent as part of that to effectuate that.
And what stage are you in today?
Yeah, so as a company, we are Series A. We have about 20 people. We, I would say, are growing pretty quickly. I think there's a lot of traction in this space, and there's a certain wave I think happening, especially in the life sciences right now, of people getting further and further into data. And I think part of that is that people have gone through the early stages of saying, oh, let's apply AI to everything without breaking that down too much. And then they're realizing exactly the same thing that I think we see from our experience in finance and in life sciences and machine learning, which is that it's about the data. you got to get the data into one place. And so there's this, I would say, secular theme within the industry where, the automation conferences, the liquid handler lab automation and robotics conferences, they're all talking about data integration now, lab of the future, data integration. Everyone's about data integration. And so I think we're riding that wave and have grown pretty quickly and effectively on that basis.
Very good. And then what do you see as the road ahead?
Yeah, so from here, I would say our goal is to become infrastructure for the industry and be the tool that people use to build and manage and run integrations and build their software stack on top of. So for us, certainly a lot of that is instrument integration. That's a lot of what we do today, and we're continuing to improve that and build more and more capabilities around that. We're actually tomorrow, as of this recording, doing a webinar about a new product we're releasing called virtualization, where we can actually run certain analytical apps, Windows programs in the cloud in our environment and help users do that, because that also helps them get physically out of the wet lab and into a virtual environment for managing their data. So those sorts of tools for us, we break it down as our data lake, our lab as code integration system for mapping data, our agents, the ways that we connect to data, whether it's on a Windows PC or in some web API or something, and then virtualization. Those are our infrastructure primitives that we're developing. And the goal in the short and medium term is to really build that out and be the perfect infrastructure to build and unite all of your software on and manage your data centrally and map things together. And then long term, the goal with that is to say, okay, there's a lot of data complexity, but if you've at least mapped it together between all of your tools, you can start making sense of it centrally. You can start applying standards and ontologies and things like that to it. People have really struggled, I think, to get a lot of value to date in some of those ontologies out there and in data standardization because it's tough. And so to us, what we want to facilitate is mixing together the data integration and the data standardization. They're almost one and the same. Like what you do with the data, what analysis you use for the data tells you something about it. And so by blending code and data storage into one place, we're hoping that this can be the best tool long-term actually for enterprises to create their data lakes and overall digital strategies on top of.
Yeah, I think of so many other sort of analogies that I could apply to what I'm hearing, right? I mean, I think of, Salesforce without MuleSoft would have been really challenging for a lot of organizations that had older systems that they had to get data from and then get it into Salesforce. You think about, just kind of the general public, could use Zapier, to do something similar. And now all of a sudden, we're talking about something very similar in one part of your company, but then other aspects, outside of that are even greater tools. That sound like it'll be great advantages for the life sciences community.
Exactly. I think you hit right on our inspiration there, which is, what if you had MuleSoft or Boomi, except that you could, put in analytical steps with Python code in between as if it were a bioinformatics pipeline? Or what if you had like Databricks or Snowflake, except that they specialized in connecting to the physical world, in connecting to very complex data interfaces for integrations. I think that's what we're trying to marry together. And I think we've made a lot of great progress on. The data scale in the life sciences space is actually lower, I think, than a lot of people realize compared to many other spaces. And so cloud infrastructure these days is so powerful. It makes it, I think, pretty effective for us to take a lot of these cloud infrastructure tools and suit them to this particular domain.
Yeah, and so many instruments that I'm aware of anyway in the space as well. They send out, such basic information. It's valuable information about what's being run, in the system. But again, it's not like it's coming out as some encrypted, big encrypted file either. And the power of being able to do this, would increase the efficiency, I would imagine, of a lot of organizations as well. And just being able to do that, like you said, like you started with, right? We all sort of look at the expense of drug discovery and everything else that has to happen. And then getting further down the line to the point of actually manufacturing a drug, it isn't necessarily inexpensive, but also isn't always the most efficient thing. So this would greatly help with that as well.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think one of the things that was so inspiring to us that I remember, I think late last year, we ran into a client that was building out a biomanufacturing site for their GMP manufacturing, and they were developing some gene therapy for a very rare disease, and they were just going to produce a handful of doses or something quite low like that per year, and it would be very specialized and tailored to each of the actual people that it was going to be applied to. And so, in a way, with those things, if people have a ticking clock on their disease, and you can through this automation save even one batch of the production, so they don't have to take another 2 to 4 weeks to reculture it and regrow it. There's a real large expected number of value of lives that are being saved through that. So that's one of the things I love about this space is that it's not just dollars or even saving scientists time, which I think is the more approximate, how much time can we save scientists that like day a week of their data manipulation and munging that they're doing. But it's the fact that that translates one to one into the impact that it has on people's health.
Absolutely. So, Nathan, there are three questions that I like to ask every guest. What inspires you?
Yeah, I love I have this love hate relationship, I would say, with the complexity of data in this space because again, for someone, I've been in the life sciences for some time now, but from my original youthful finance days. There's such a purity to how you think about things, and you have this value that you can place on things, and everything. Contracts are human constructed, and so you can reason about them, I think, in a very clean way, which is nice. But then you move into a space like this, and as we were talking about, it's so messy and so complex, and so biology is an evolutionary thing. People are doing R&D, so they're almost tautologically trying something new that defies the current data structures that people have. So I think it creates a great challenge for us, and there's some sort of I feel like a science of managing that complexity. I mean, in a way, it's I think what you do and that sort of consultative model of thinking through and building out process and structure for people. So solving the problem is fun, and I think the problem existing in its current form is intractable. So yeah, that inspires me. I think it's a very unique problem. It's not a like, oh, let's develop new theory problem. It's actually, in my view, it's kind of like business automation in other industries, except it's just the worst. It's the most severe, by far, case of business automation out there. And so it's like the final frontier. And I think solving that is a really intellectually interesting exercise to approach. And I say that, of course, because I think the main thing that inspires us is making an impact on patients' lives and being able to make an impact on the industry. But within that, you kind of have to day to day, I think, also take some comfort in the more near term, like what we can touch as Ganymede is cloud infrastructure and business automation. So that's fun too, in and of itself.
Yeah, and I mean, I frequently will tell people as well that we all sort of touch in a way, hopefully, the things that happen with patients. I mean, that's kind of why I love this field in general is that I feel like the things that I do day in and day out at one stage or another contribute, and whether it's in automation or consulting, certainly can have an impact as well. I agree with you.
Yeah.
And what concerns you?
Yeah, I would say it does feel like the complexity is such that it's almost intractable sometimes. I think the pace at which the industry is developing is very slow, and it's not multifaceted enough. I think compared to other industries that went through their digital transformations 10, 20 years ago, bio is moving, but it's moving very slowly. I think there's a couple themes that concern me specifically. So one is, the biotechs, the pharmas themselves, they do have a lot of impetus to move their data online, to get it structured, to make it fair. Of course, it's concerning that we're still having this conversation in 2023. But all the same, people there's movement. They understand the problem, and what's inhibiting that is the complexity. But I think specifically, one theme is that people have made big investments in digital transformation. It's 5 or 10 years in now. And I think what they're finding is that although that helps a lot in terms of saving people time at the moment of data capture and in terms of finding and searching for data, it is hard to make use of data after the fact. Data has a shorter shelf life, I think, than a lot of people anticipated. And those dreams of saying, oh, we'll collect all the data and then apply machine learning to it or something later on without specifically knowing what you were going to do, those are not panning out. And so I think I think there are some enterprise IT teams that are having to reconsider how they think about digital transformations. And that's a theme that we, I think, really tie into, which is saying, yeah, unless you have all your data not just fair, but really knitted together and contextualized in the analysis that was done so that you could replay, the shelf life, it's gonna suffer. You need to have that context, and you need to have data actually knitted together and linked, not just findable and accessible. And so I think that's a theme that is concerning in the short term, but I think will get fixed in the long term. And so I think there is a little bit of a pivot towards a little more of a near-term focus on saving scientists time over the abstract idea of just having data. But the fact that doesn't work is concerning. And then I would say the other thing is the instrument manufacturers and their incentive structure. Mm-hmm. The fact that we do all this integration is mostly because the instrument manufacturers put all their data into different formats. And it's not, as you said, the data is there. It's not hard to parse the format. It's just in a different format every time. There's a little standardization. Yes. And I almost don't blame them, because it is just, there's no demand for integration, because I think people are more just saving the data. They're not doing something with it immediately. And so, no Series A stage biotech has ever asked, how can you integrate this instrument when they buy an instrument? They'll just buy the instrument and then figure out later what they want to do with it. So I think there's a mindset shift that needs to happen there as well, where people start thinking, okay, I actually need to care about how the data comes off this instrument when I buy it, not just, oh, is it going to suit my assay perfectly?
Yeah, and I think the incentive for building out connectivity and these efficiencies, up front, in a lot of cases, whenever I've been a part of these organizations, it's just very hard to justify year over year. You could start with a really important vision that says, hey, look, we're going to build the most, the overall most efficient instrument for somebody to come along and use. And then on the back end, you're fighting R&D costs and other things to try and just justify, overall, why do you want to build this tool whenever it's not going to help us sell one more? It's going to, be hard to justify up front. And then, by the way, we're not going to connect to anything else, as well. And we've tried in companies that I've been a part of, we've also tried going the other way, go to the LIMS manufacturers and say, why don't you tell us the standard? We'll put the data in that standard in our instrument. And then that way it just, sort of flows through. And oftentimes they don't want to give you the standard. They want you to have to integrate. It's an additional cost for them to have to spend time to tie all these pieces together. And it's just, being on the other side it's so difficult as well, from the instrument manufacturer standpoint too.
Yeah.
And, I feel this battle, push and pull inside of the industry. And it's like, look, at the end of the day, it would be great to get to the end stage of a life-saving drug a heck of a lot faster. So, regardless, whatever it takes to try and get there, it seems like it's important. And in the meantime, it's a reason for your company to be here as well. So, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and I feel like it helps. We always try to respect the state of the industry and its incumbent state. There's a good reason why these incentives don't exist. It's not anyone's fault or anything that things are not as automated as they could be. But I feel like that reflects to us. You just need to deliver value faster. You can't rely on going and doing something with the data 5 years down the road. You have to, if you deliver value immediately and are automating what the scientists are doing with their hands, in the moment, you roll something out and within weeks it's obvious that people's lives has improved. I feel like that's what's really required. And that's sort of like the agile methodology in a lot of ways, is ship something smaller, ship something more focused, prove value, prove that people like it. And then that will get the traction. And so I think that's what we really try to embed in our platform and our approach.
Absolutely. Last question, what excites you?
Yeah, I think I was just at a friend's PhD defense a few weeks ago, and it is really cool. It's so amazing to see what's at the forefront of academic biology and what some of the new companies are working on and how far some of the tech bios out there are pushing the envelope. And so, although I know in the last couple of years there's been a little bit of market turmoil, I'm still so optimistic for the science itself. It is a really cool scientific field, and I feel like the potential. There's some step changes. I feel like that we are on the verge of pushing towards. The amount of work that's being done in understanding not just genomics, but epigenetics and how biological systems interact with each other.
Right.
It feels like that is finally starting to complete the picture of how does genotype turn into phenotype. The answer is, well, it's also genotype and all these other 20 different things that turn into a phenotype. But now we know we're making progress on it. So I think that really excites me. And I feel like it's going to be a really fun ride over the next couple decades as the industry goes further and further. And in many ways, things like CRISPR, I feel like have been a little bit more incremental than they were originally promised, but it feels like there's things coming down the pipeline in technologies and also ways to apply software that will start to deliver some of those big step changes. So I'm really excited to see where the industry itself goes on the scientific side.
Yeah, I think I would agree with you. I mean, it's very exciting to watch what scientists do and very exciting to sort of watch where we're going. I completely agree. Well, Nathan Clark, thank you so much for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was
Thanks a lot.
my pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.